Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Point-to-Point Encryption Case Studies for Retail and Commercial Fueling. I'd like to thank our sponsor for today, and that's Mako Networks. My name is Linda Toth. I'm your host and moderator, and I'm the Managing Director for Conexxus. For today's agenda, we're first going to do some housekeeping, which I'm doing now. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Conexxus. I'll introduce our presenters. They'll go through their presentation, and then we'll do some live Q&A. So the webinar is being recorded and it will be made available for replay on Conexxus365.org in about a week or so. As participants, you are muted, and if you want to ask questions, please use the GoToWebinar interface. You'll find a spot where you can put your questions in. I would encourage you to get your questions in early. You don't have to wait till the very end of the webinar to do that. And it's very helpful because generally we get a lot of questions, and so we want to make sure that we're able to get to yours. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot something on there. So PCI continuing education credits, a lot of webinars do count for that, including this one. So if you need continuing education credits for PCI, just send us an email at 365@conexxus.org and we'll get you a certificate for that. This is the disclaimer that basically says Conexxus doesn't endorse any products or services, and the views and opinions expressed are not necessarily those of Conexxus. I want to give a shout out to our annual Diamond sponsors. These folks allow us to continue the work that we do, and they really go above and beyond in sponsoring the work that we do. So thank you to all of the Diamond sponsors, including Mako, who's sponsoring this webinar. So next slide, please. So a little bit about Conexxus. We are a nonprofit technology organization. We are independent from NACS, but we partner very heavily with NACS on many initiatives. We are a volunteer organization, and our members tend to do the heavy lifting. Conexxus just provides that neutral forum where retailers and vendors can get together to network and come up with solutions that are good for the industry. We also educate on a variety of topics, including the Conexxus 365 webinars. And then we also advocate for the industry at a technical level where other organizations are either setting policy or standards. We're at the table to make sure that your ability to do business isn't negatively impacted. If you want to connect with us, you can either do that through our website, conexxus.org, or the conexxus365.org website. I would encourage you to visit Conexxus 365 and take a look at the webinars that we've done recently. They are available for replay, and on there you can see a schedule of our upcoming events. So today we have two great speakers with us on the point-to-point encryption topic. First, we have Sam Pfanstiel, and you can tell by all of those acronyms after his name, he's got a lot of education and he's very smart and he's got a lot of licenses and credentials. So he is with Viking Cloud, and he's one of our data security experts in Conexxus. And then we also have Sharon Scace. She works for WEX during the day and does a lot for Conexxus. She chairs the Retail Financial Transactions Committee, which oversees this and a lot of other work. So I'm very happy that she's with us today as well. So Sam and Sharon, I'll turn this over to you, and you guys can get started with the main presentation.
Thanks, Linda.
Thanks, Linda. So as Linda pointed out, we're going to talk about the point-to-point encryption case studies for retail and commercial fueling. So first we're going to go into a little bit of an agenda here. So why is this an introduction instead of giving you the answer to the question? What should you consider when evaluating a point-to-point encryption solution? What will you learn in the white paper? Which case studies are included? And how can you get some more information? So we're going to jump in. We've put together 8 case studies into a white paper, and this takes the work that we had done 5 years ago to say theoretically what could we do, and these are the real world examples and developments that have happened to make this a reality. This is following on the white paper Guidance on Improving Security in the Interim to a Point-to-Point Encryption Implementation, and it now shows you some solutions that are there in the market. And Sam, would you like to talk about some criteria for evaluating a point-to-point solution?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, it's absolutely a pleasure to be here with you guys today. And just want to thank Sharon for all the work she's done in chairing the RFTC committee and this P2PE subcommittee. We have indeed done a lot of work over the last few years, and this white paper, this case study white paper, We hope it will be very valuable to you as you look to evaluate a point-to-point encryption solution for your C-store. The goals, as Sharon mentioned, for the white paper is to give the technology providers within our space, all of which are Conexxus members, and we thank them for their participation, the opportunity to explain what they've done and to bring together their various partnerships, their various technologies, their security technologies, compliance impacts, and really just explain in a somewhat of a common format. And as Sharon said, we've been very fortunate to have 8 participating case studies in this white paper. Now with the white paper, which again, you can download from conexxus.org, and we'll get into more of those details in this webinar, there's a lot of content, and this can be, it can feel prohibitive. It can feel a little overwhelming. Trust me, as a P2PE assessor, it's what I do in my day job, is to evaluate point-to-point encryption solutions as a P2PE QSA. As Linda said earlier, yes, I do have I guess a good number of acronyms, but my primary role and where I spend most of my time is in point-to-point encryption. And I recognize, though, and I guess in my after-hours work, my volunteer work with Conexxus, I recognize that there are so many other business requirements that really do impact the fit of a P2PE solution in our industry. And so, as you evaluate, as you see the points are made on this slide, I mean, many of these are intuitive, right? You need to take into inventory what you currently have in place, right? Unless you're setting up a brand new installation, you already have fuel dispensers. You may have a controller, retail systems. You have existing vendors and acquirer relationships. And you may even have this list of approved vendors that your either oil brand or distributor has already identified as being approved for use in your environment. And so you have to take those things into account, because you're going to read in this document 8 various vendors and their partners. And you will certainly, and I hope you will discover quickly, those that are, may or may not work in your environment for these reasons. The next thing that we must identify is, what types of cards you're accepting. So PCI cards are, of course, the 5 major brands: Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, and JCB. And as many of you should know, if you accept those PCI branded cards, you do need to be PCI compliant. And so compliance is definitely one aspect of what we've taken into account with these case studies. But you may also have non-PCI cards, those cards that are not branded by one of the 5 major brands. And those may include closed loop cards, like gift cards. You may also have a mix of both PCI and non-PCI cards when you look at your fleet acceptance. So where you're accepting commercial cards and fleet, some of those may be branded by MasterCard. Others may be WEX branded or branded in conjunction with the major brands, or you may have Voyager and other fleet cards that may or may not bear the brands of those PCI brands. And you may have loyalty cards, which would be potentially accepted in your card readers, as well as even non-ISO cards. And these would be like perhaps the ability to scan the magnetic stripe on the back of a driver's license or some other identification badge. And all of those must be taken into account when you look at a point-to-point encryption solution, because P2PE solutions require that the card reader be able to encrypt appropriately the data that are required to be encrypted for both security and compliance. And again, other technologies that you may have going on in the fuel dispenser, such as EMV, contactless, you may have a mobile application enablement, omni-channel tokenization, or other omni-channel capabilities may come into play as you talk to each of these technology providers. And as I hinted at earlier, PCI compliance is one aspect of security, but you may also have you may not be under a PCI mandate. You may be working with an acquirer solution where the acquirer may say, look, these are approved technologies you may use for your compliance, for your security program. And you'll want to talk to your acquirer about those, as well as if you're under a distributorship and you or a brand, an oil brand program, whereby they have specific security requirements. So taking all of this entire picture into consideration is really our goal and yours as well. Go ahead, Sharon. So, and I believe this is me as well, right? So each of the case studies that we've prepared we've tried to standardize the areas that we discuss because we don't want to show any deference to one vendor versus another. A lot of effort has gone into making sure that each of the providers in this space are presented equitably. And so what we've done is we've standardized these 4 major areas that you'll find when you download and read the case study document: which devices and systems and service providers they support. And in that section, you may find that there are references to certain types of devices and systems, and Sharon will go into that in just a moment. Then we've included 2 sets of data flow diagrams that you'll find in every single case study, and I'll talk about those here a little bit later. And then we're going to allow each of the vendors to discuss how those various card types that I mentioned a moment ago would be impacted when they implement their encryption solution in your forecourt. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the security and compliance impacts, both PCI compliance as well as the suitability or acceptability for a PCI point-to-point encryption or PCI validated P2PE approval for the given solution. Similarly, what are the underlying security impacts? And because ultimately that's why we have these programs, is to prevent your organization from being a victim of some of the threats of data breach that have unfortunately afflicted our industry. Sharon?
Thanks, Sam. So going a little bit deeper into the devices, systems, and service providers, we have lots of acronyms that we like to use. So I want to talk just a little bit about what are some of the devices that you're going to see in here. We'll talk about point of interactions that are supported, whether this is a secure card reader, or is this an encrypting pin pad, or is this a near field communication reader. So all of those devices that you're interacting with that payment. Your point of sale or your electronic payment system, a dispenser controller, a forecourt controller, what are those controlling devices that you have on site? Point-to-point solution providers. That might be someone else that's already in your ecosystem, or you may be introducing somebody new to help with this. Then as we move further out from the site itself, key injection facility. This key isn't like your debit key. It doesn't have anything to do with your EMB encryption keys. This is purely for encrypting the data. Key management systems. What type of encryption management are you using? What is your encryption scheme? Decryption management, depending on how you're handling those cards, as Sam was pointing out. And then who is your front-end processor? Who's actually receiving this message, and what are they expecting to do with it? Back to you, Sam.
Exactly. And each of those may individually, every one of those systems and service providers can feel very distant, very uncomfortable, depending on where you are in working with these credit card transactions technologies. So we've broken them up within the document. Now you'll see on the left in this particular slide, kind of a collection of some of the vendor-specific diagrams. So we've allowed each of the vendors to supply their own diagram, which should help to explain the underlying whether data flow or entity diagrams or relationships provided. And most of these are, in fact, entity sort of diagrams, either as data flows or network diagrams. And then on the right-hand side, you see on this slide that we've also created a swim lane diagram that we've worked in conjunction with each of the vendors to provide a more standardized data flow, which is more of a flow chart. It does have some logic involved because each of the solutions may be handling some of the nuanced challenges within our industry slightly differently. And so in this data flow or swim lane diagram, we have identified, as Sharon said, the POI device, whether that be a secure card reader, a contactless transceiver or NFC for accepting contactless transactions, an encrypting pen pad, and of course an SCR, a secure card reader includes the integrated chip card reader. So it could be either a magstripe reader or an EMV chip reader. And all those various types of card readers, may or may not come into play in terms of capabilities. Some vendors may support P2PE in the SCR, while they don't support it perhaps in the contactless transceiver, the NFC. And that's understandable. And so we certainly want to bring that to light so you can make an educated decision around those different devices. And so the swim lane diagram helps to standardize that, as well as, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but the idea of leaving certain credit cards in the clear. So point-to-point encryption underlying the whole idea behind P2PE, as Sharon said, is to encrypt the credit card data within the point of interaction device, and then not decrypt it until it completely leaves your environment, right? This isn't about just encrypting, and while the Conexxus standard does support the idea of decrypting it anywhere, which could be inside of the environment, right? You could encrypt from the forecourt, from the ASD to the inside of your C-store, and that's perfectly fine. But when you encrypt it from the forecourt and you do not decrypt it until it leaves your environment, then you're going to be looking at things like decryption hosts. And so that's also represented as a lane within this diagram. The decryption host meaning somewhere downstream, either at the processor or maybe even as a third-party provider, that is decrypting the credit card data before, of course, it is acted upon, either to send messages back to the controller and ultimately to the display for fleet prompting, or whether the card data is decrypted and then re-encrypted under an acquiring message that's sent up to the processor for authorization and settlement. So these are all various entities. They're fairly standard within these swim lane diagrams, and so hopefully this helps as you look at each of the 8 case studies. You're able to see how the transaction flow operates in each of them. Sharon?
Thank you, Sam. As Sam was talking about how are you handling each one of these cards, and he's reviewed that we have the consumer cards, the ones that we carry in our pocket, fleet cards, more commercial cards. What about loyalty cards? Often you still need information from those cards. And then your local cards. Maybe it's not something that you send all the way up to a processor. You do something a little bit more within your own environment to approve those cards. Each one of those you may look at differently for how do you want to secure that information. Do you do selective masking? Many of us are familiar with that first 6, last 4, what gets printed on a receipt, and everything else is encrypted that is sent up. Very common way of doing things. But then when you get to fleet cards and you look at prompting information, is that prompting information included in the mag stripe that's just been masked? Or has that information now available in a different methodology? Bin whitelisting. This is where you take certain bins and you tell them, don't do any masking, don't do any encryption on these cards. Is that something that you want running around within your environment, any of your cards in the clear? And then is there host intervention? To get that prompting, are you going to a decryption host and it's telling you, go ahead and prompt for driver ID odometer instead of having to look into the mag stripe or the chip data? So there are different solutions based on your environment and the cards that you're taking, and you may use one of these, you may use all of these in your environment. And Sam, would you like to talk about security and compliance impacts?
I would love to. Yeah, so as Sharon said, I mean, there are different ways in which the card data is encrypted, masked, or left in the clear. And so each of these have underlying impacts. You'll see here there's 3 major categories, and I'll speak to each of these now, but in the white paper, each of these will be detailed in even further to a further degree for each of the solutions. But generally speaking, the security impact of leaving certain cards in the clear while encrypting others mitigates or limits the exposure of what may be considered sensitive data in your environment. So at a very, I guess you could consider maybe at a 30,000-foot view, when we look at what are the effects of encryption in the forecourt, you are accomplishing security objectives. And we wanted to make this clear because not every solution is PCI validated for point-to-point encryption, and not every solution necessarily directly translates to PCI compliance impacts, but each of the solutions does provide improvement in your overall security. And as organizations that must take their entire risk portfolio into account, meaning, where do you have, because you have fraud, you have potentials for conversion and theft, you have, obviously inventory loss, you may have, there's so many risks that an organization must address. Focusing your attention to the degree that you're able to reduce the overall data security impact can be one possible objective of this white paper. And as we did with the guidance for interim on the way to point-to-point encryption, some of that white paper as well includes some of those objectives and how we can speak to that when we're seeking to justify maybe a budget for these types of investments. The next area is PCI P2PE. Now, PCI P2PE is a program within the PCI, the Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council. As I mentioned, I'm a P2PE QSA, so most of you are familiar with QSAs. A P2PE QSA is one that works with the solution providers to validate one of these technologies to be listed on the PCI website as a P2PE solution. Now, I can speak from both firsthand experience because I used to work with a solution provider, and before I became a QSA for P2PE, and have worked in this capacity for about the last 6 years, is that these are very difficult standards. Okay, so for acquirers or solution providers to obtain this validated status is an accomplishment. And as a result of having that full validated listing, a solution provider can give merchants such as yourselves a significant scope reduction under the PCI DSS program. And that may include, ignoring certain systems, what we call scope reduction, where you can look at your firewalls and say, look, my firewalls are out of scope. I don't need to look at them because we know that they only transmit encrypted data that has been confirmed to be of sufficient cryptographic strength to all key management processes are in place. These data are not considered sensitive because they have been protected on each end of the point-to-point life cycle. But then there's also solutions that provide PCI DSS impacts, even if they don't have a P2PE validation. Now, this is a little bit of a sticky area, and so I allowed each of the various vendors to speak to how their solution can improve your overall PCI DSS risk and or compliance burden. It's important to note that each of the vendors has spoken for themselves in most capacities. I, as a QSA, have helped to guide some of the conversations as I conducted these interviews, and we'll speak to the other videos that you'll be able to watch with each of the technology providers. However, the statements have not all been validated or necessarily vetted by the PCI Council. So there's no statements in this document that say you will receive this PCI DSS scope reduction, or we tried to maintain certainly an objectivity around the language in this white paper. And so I wanted to mention that because it's important that you speak with the vendors and you speak with your acquirer about what the actual PCI DSS impacts will be for your organization. One hypothetical or possibility is you may be running with your retail systems on a non-P2PE solution while you run your fuel dispenser on a validated point-to-point encryption solution. Well, that's fantastic, and that's a one possible scenario. But if you must understand that once that card data is intermingled within an environment, say your back office or in your network devices that are transmitting both validated P2PE and non-validated, those can add complexity to your overall PCI DSS. So the takeaway here is, even though the information in this white paper should be very valuable to you, you'll definitely want to speak with your acquirer. You'll definitely want to speak with, and you may decide to speak with a QSA or even a QSA P2PE about how ultimately these decisions will affect your organization. Sharon?
Thanks, Sam. We've been teasing about what these case studies are and who's been included in them. And so everyone will notice there are 9 names here that are included in the case studies, and we refer to 8 case studies. It's an excellent example of how Conexxus brings competitors and partners and solution providers together and gives the space to work through these solutions and share best practices and bring together solutions that work. So you may not find your exact setup, but you'll probably find bits and pieces that make sense and that you can build on from there. As Sam pointed out, we don't say that this is all of the solutions that are out there. These are the ones that have come forward and shared, and we're very happy to include more in the future. Just contacting us at support@conexxus.org so that we can get you included in future papers. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sam about questions to ask your vendors after you've gone through these papers.
Right, absolutely. And, and obviously we could have taken this time during this webinar to go directly through each of the case studies, but quite frankly, this is a lengthy document. And so and that's okay, right? We wanted it to be full of value to you, but I wanted to at least, rather than going through individual case studies, and as I mentioned earlier, you'll actually have a chance to do that directly with each of the vendors via a pre-recorded session that we're conducting with those vendors, and access those from Conexxus365.org. So that's a free service that we're making available to you as our audience on this webinar. But these are questions that, generally speaking, because ultimately, we have asked these similar questions in these interview sessions with the technology providers, and they've answered them, and we've incorporated those into the case studies. But you'll want to ask some of these same questions yourself. So let's go through these just to kind of review, a due diligence process and why it may be impactful for these decisions, right? So as I mentioned earlier, what hardware and software have you already invested in, and what additional investments will you need to make? Will you need to be purchasing new terminals? Even if you're staying within the same vendor, they may say, look, this particular model doesn't support it, but this newer model does. Well, what does that look like for you? Is that a migration? Are you able to deploy partially on the old and the new? Is it a firmware update, or is it an actual physical hardware update? Are there impacts to your dispenser systems themselves, or your point of sale, or even your fuel and retail controllers? Secondly, and I think this is probably one of the more important questions you must ask is my processor or acquirer supported by the solution? As you know, we're encrypting, a solution provider will encrypt at the device, but then it must decrypt outside of your control. The reason for that is if it's decrypting within your control, then really you or really a malicious actor within your organization. Again, we have to address these types of thoughts and considerations for security. If it's being decrypted within your organization, then you still have risk exposure. So decrypting outside of your organization is ideal for point-to-point encryption, but now you're no longer in control necessarily of the processing path. And so you have to make sure that your processor, your preferred processor is supported, as well as your acquiring bank. Now you may, of course, elect to choose and change processors, and those are good decisions to consider. However, most organizations are well invested within their processing relationships, so you'll want to make sure that the technology supports that existing relationship. What card types are supported? Again, as Sharon and I have both mentioned, which of these types of cards are you currently supporting? And ask your vendor these things and make them give you a direct answer, right? You certainly don't want to go in with your eyes, not fully open to the possibilities that there may be conflicts in support of certain card types or even transaction types, as the next bullet point says. Right? Are you have you fully deprecated magstripe? Or obviously most fuel we're still doing magstripe, and that's the reality. But have you implemented EMV, and will that be supported by the solution? Contactless, certainly we've had the mandate to move to EMV contactless, and so you'll want to ask your vendor, do they support contactless if that's something you wish to continue to support? We mentioned PCI validated solutions. Certainly ask your vendor if they are PCI validated, and that is a very specific word that means you're listed, also known as PCI listed. And you can go to PCIsecuritystandards.org and click on the approved products and vendors, and you can navigate to the point-to-point encryption solutions, and you can see it's all right there. There's about 100 validated solutions, and you'll see many of these vendors on that list. But then the question is this solution validated, right? Because the reality is the PCI list is specific devices under specific conditions, and you'll want to confirm if that's an important point for you, that this exact implementation is PCI validated. And if not, do they have a roadmap for validation? Or even if they don't, how is my compliance as a merchant impacted How is my PCI DSS compliance impacted, or commonly called PCI compliance? How is that impacted if I implement this solution? And if the solution is offered in conjunction with your acquirer, you'll often want to speak with your acquirer about whether or not they will allow you to complete a reduced assessment form, or even to consider scope reduction as part of your compliance assessment. We haven't spoken much about other brand programs, but there are other brand programs for implementation of validated point-to-point encryption. Among them are both Visa and MasterCard offer incentives. So again, we can talk about these things offline or in other webinars. I know we've spoken about these very topics. So definitely check the Conexxus 365 library for other point-to-point encryption webinars where we've spoken to more of these drivers and why you would want to do point-to-point encryption. But within this context, it's really more about getting the answers to those questions that you may have. I will say that validated point-to-point encryption, as well as even non-validated point-to-point encryption, does impact the supply chain with respect to which devices you can use, as we've discussed at length, but also how the devices must be purchased and shipped to your environment. They will, as Sharon mentioned earlier, they need to go through a key injection process. And so that key injection, whether it's at the manufacturer, at a key injection facility, or even after it's deployed within your forecourt, these devices do need to receive their data encryption keys, and that may affect the deployment and implementation process. So be asking those questions as well. What does the implementation process look like for me? But in addition, P2PE requires that the devices be inspected. And when I say devices, I'm talking about the point of interaction device, the magstripe reader, as well as, or if it's inside any sort of a retrofit kit. These do need to be inspected, as you already most likely do in terms of checking for skimmers, and you should be doing. But these are now requirements under these brand programs. And so you'll want to ask, what does my operator need to do on a regular basis in order to remain in compliance after we've got these devices into our environment? Our repair operations, and do they say, look, if you're going to send a device for repair, you have to send it to this authorized facility? Those are very real impacts to your organization, and they're not just doing that necessarily to interrupt your current process, because these repair operations may also impact the security of those sensitive encryption keys, and so therefore there are some impacts on those types of things. So again, not trying to scare anyone, but definitely get these questions out there and let them answer directly for themselves. Sharon mentioned fleet prompting, which fleet cards are accepted, but also, are there specific prompts that are supported or not supported? And will it require, for me to accept fleet, am I required to leave all of my fleet data in the clear? And that's one possibility. It's not the ideal situation, but there are some vendors that are able to support validated point-to-point encryption for non-fleet cards while leaving fleet cards on the BIN whitelist, which Sharon talked about earlier. That bank identification number, the BIN, is the first 6 or the first 8 characters of the credit card number. And based on that BIN, they may have to leave the entire credit card in the clear and non-encrypted. And if that's the case, you'll want to know how that affects my P2PE or PCI compliance. And finally, the big one is, okay, tell me where you've done this before. Or if you haven't done this before, what is your roadmap and what does it look like? Am I on the cutting edge? Am I getting the biggest benefit, but I'm one of the guinea pigs, so to speak? Or is this something that's really been road tested and is ready for implementation for my environment with my devices in a way that I can trust will be scalable, but also free from unexpected challenges? Sharon?
Thanks, Sam. You've given us a lot to think about. And we do have a call to action, and to get more information and to read the white paper, which you can download from Conexxus.org, or the next step may be for you to listen to the interviews. Sam has interviewed each one of the solution providers in a similar format, asking the same questions to get a baseline of information from each one of them, and those will be uploaded on to Conexxus365.org. Any final thoughts, Sam?
Well, I just appreciate, again, I want to definitely call out to each of the members of Conexxus that have worked with us to create these case studies. It's been a significant investment, and obviously, the collaboration within the industry is rarely seen. Right, that we have competitors and technology providers working across boundaries, and many of as Sharon said, of the 9 Conexxus members who have participated, you'll see their names in various case studies, right? Because that's the way we all work, right? There's a lot of interoperability. That's why Conexxus exists. And so hopefully by getting the opportunity to interview each of these, as we've done, you'll get a chance to filter through some of the noise, right? We want the white paper and the video interviews to help point you in the right direction so that you can have those one-on-one conversations with your vendors to get more information about your environment. So I highly recommend checking out the videos that we've uploaded to Conexxus365.org and then taking that next step, which I would add the third bullet point, right? Which is to identify which of the vendors can support your environment and meet the questions that we talked about earlier, and then reach out to them directly. And we've provided those contact information in those videos as well as in the white paper itself.
Thanks so much. And now we're going to get ready for Q&A.
Here we go. All right, so we've got some questions coming in here. Let me move my screens around so I can actually see them. So let's see, the first one we have is, I'm on the Conexxus website and I don't see the paper or video interviews. When are those going to be available and where will they be?
I will take that one. That's a great question. So the white paper itself will be on Conexxus.org, and the interviews and this, the taping of this webinar will be on Conexxus365.org, and they should be available probably the end of the next week. And we'll send out a reminder on November 1st to remind everybody that they're out there and to take a look at that.
Yeah, and actually we're planning on putting the paper on Conexxus 365 where you see the replay as well in the interviews. Other people can download that from the website, and that is in the final stages of being approved by the General Assembly. Public comment period ends today, and then it has to go through an approval process, so that will be available next week. So here's a question. Sam, this is probably for you. Point-to-point encryption has been the standard and available in North America since 2014. Why has adoption not occurred, and what is the difference between an end-to-end E2EE versus P2PE solution?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the PCI Security Standards Council created the P2PE program and standard in 2011. The first program was launched in 2012, so it has been 10 years, almost to the day, since the standard was released. And there have been, as I mentioned, I just checked because I couldn't remember the exact number, but there's now 109 solutions. So adoption has proceeded with the P2PE validation, which is again governed by the PCI Security Standards Council. For submission and listing of these solutions who have met all the requirements for encryption, key management, decryption, and chain of custody of devices. However, I think to the asker's question is, why has adoption not, been there? And right in our industry, we've not seen as many, perhaps as has been have been rolled out into retail. Now, some of the vendors in this white paper are indeed validated. So to make that point very clear, there are validated listings in this white paper, as well as technology providers who have gapped their whether it's their POI device or their software against the PCI P2PE standard and said, we can be used in a validated solution. We're not a solution provider, but we could be used in a solution. So there may be technology providers watching this webinar who say, I could offer a P2PE validated solution. I sit in the space of, where I work with the merchants and I work with the vendors, the gateway providers, the decryption hosts. All of these things could be brought together with the pieces that are within this white paper. And then yet there's a few that have been notated in this white paper who are not able to be validated. And as I mentioned earlier, but they still provide security benefit. So the reason we haven't seen as much adoption in our industry, and everyone could probably weigh in on what those reasons would be, but I think the EMV mandate A lot of the, obviously COVID has disrupted some of our research and development, but there's also been, other pushes for EMV, rather for contactless. And we also know that we deal with a lot of legacy devices in fuel retail, right? We have a very tight margin. And so when it comes to fuel dispensing, there's not often a lot of investment dollars, and many of you watching this webinar can probably comment on that. So the good news is we're seeing that now come to fruition. We're seeing a lot of these providers now bring to market validated solutions. So I think the idea that there's not very many is a myth that we want to dispel. There are many solutions available, and they can be viewed at the PCI Security Standards website as well as within this white paper.
Okay. Can you go into a little bit of the second part of that question? And then there's also a follow-up question by another individual. So does the white paper cover the differences between end-to-end versus point-to-point encryption? And this person said, I find it difficult to describe this or point out the areas that are covered in one but not in another.
Yeah, that's fair. There's about 1,200 requirements in the P2PE standard, and so I hesitate to go through all of them. But the 4 items that I just mentioned are the main items, and I would add a couple to those. So encryption, how encryption is done within the device. So a device has to have the secure reading and exchange of data technology, which is part of the PTS standard, which protects all of the sensitive encryption keys in that device. And we do have some legacy devices that don't have that technology, but could still be used for encryption, but they wouldn't be as secure from a potential attack on the device itself. Then there's how did that device get into the field? So we call that, loosely we talk about that as chain of custody. That device had to be shipped out to the field and installed, whether as a retrofit or as part of the manufacturer solution within the AFD, in a manner that could be traced back to who had access to the device at what point. This is important because during the sensitive time of deployment, there could be an adversary, a man in the middle, or a malicious insider who could inject or insert some malicious software into the device. Now, we haven't seen this, at least to my knowledge, we haven't seen this in the field, but PCI and the card brands are aware that as the adversaries look for other ways to address and to get access to the sensitive card data that they can use to, certainly commit fraud, these may be potential vectors. So that may be something where if a vendor doesn't have that secure chain of custody for getting the devices into the field, they may be able to get their solution listed as an end-to-end encryption, which is kind of a misnomer, but we'll just use the term non-validated. When you have a non-validated P2PE solution, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't mean it's not secure. It doesn't mean that it doesn't provide a lot of benefit. It just means it didn't meet this exact standard. And I should note, and then the others are the decryption environment, the cryptography, what type of encryption is taking place. The tradition in our payments ecosystem is triple DES DuckPut. We now have AES DuckPut. Those are, again, a lot of acronyms, but DuckPut, as you may have heard, is the idea that you have a unique key for every transaction. Derived unique key per transaction is what that stands for. And that's very common, but we have others as well. And you'll see some of these discussed in the white paper, RSA and VeriShield. There are other, we call them schemes, cryptographic schemes. And some of them were invented before PCI came out with their standard. And in so doing, they came up with ways in which to manage keys that PCI did not account for and cannot be validated. So there's that answer as well. These are, again, there's a great, and I don't want to get too technical, but there's a great number of ways in which a solution may barely miss that ability to be listed, but still be very secure. And so we've allowed the vendors to speak to that. And that's why I say in my questions to ask the vendors, definitely ask them those questions, and then ask them if they're offered in conjunction with the acquirer, will the acquirer grant certain considerations? And that's really an acquirer decision to make. All right, PCI puts out the standard, but they're not a compliance organization. We muddy the waters when we say PCI compliance because it makes it sound like PCI as an organization is the one that mandates compliance, and they're not. PCI puts out standards. The card brands, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, and JCB, have compliance programs. And the card brands enforce those compliance programs through their acquiring banks, right? So you need to talk to your acquirer about whether the PCI validated solution or this non-listed solution can give you the compliance benefits that you're looking for, or when it comes to PCI and PCI compliance. Does that help?
Yep, I think so. So somebody asked, if a merchant manages its own internal payment switch or gateway, are there point-to-point solutions available?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, within this, sorry, I'm taking all the questions, Sharon. Within this white paper, there are a few that have that where the decryption host can be linked to their gateway, right? So if you follow the path where the data is collected in our example, the fuel dispenser, and it routes its way to the C-store, and then it gets sent from the C-store up to a gateway, that could be part of the oil brands program or the distributors program. It could be within their data center. And chances are, I kind of said it earlier, you wouldn't want to decrypt, but you can. You can decrypt that data within your data center and still get the benefit of validated point-to-point encryption. There's two ways to do that. One is you can send it out to a third-party decryption host, and there are several that are in this white paper that offer such services. And that decryption host, in a PCI P2PE compliant manner, can decrypt the data, and then they can either return it to you or they can send it to the acquirer. Now, if they return it to you, to your gateway, then you would need to be PCI compliant for the handling of unencrypted card data, but you could still be P2PE validated where in the convenience store. And that's called a merchant managed solution in many cases, where the merchant is managing more parts and pieces of the solution, or it could be delivered as a third-party solution, and you would undergo a PCI, generally a PCI level 1 DSS validation for your data center, ensuring that you never pass that unencrypted data back into your C-store. So it does get complicated, and we didn't go into these topics in the white paper. So feel free to reach out to your QSA. You're welcome to reach out to me as well. Hit me up on LinkedIn, and we can talk about these very scenarios, but it is absolutely possible.
Okay. So we already have point-to-point encryption for our in-store transactions. Do we need to use the same point-to-point solution for outside transactions, or can we mix and match?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, absolutely. Again, we're talking about, we'll use the example of a validated solution. You could have one validation in your forecourt and one validated solution that's running in your C-store. Now, I would just caution you, now obviously, in order to be compliant as a validated solution, you as the merchant would need to only deploy approved devices in conjunction with that solution provider. So you would have two, again, if these are two separate vendors, you would have, and potentially even two separate hardware vendors, you'd have two separate, supply chain interactions, as well as, repair cycles. You would need to coordinate for your retail operations with one solution provider and for your forecourt with another. But all those things being said, absolutely, those together, both of those solutions would provide you, the security that you're looking for.
Okay. Sam, earlier you mentioned there were two programs from Visa and MasterCard that make PCI compliance easier. Can you provide more details on those?
Absolutely. So Visa was the first to offer a program they call the Technology Innovation Program, or TIP. Now this program has been out for a number of years. It's available to level 1 and level 2 merchants that have that normally would have to get a ROC, or maybe have an ISA do their ROC, or maybe even have a self-assessment of a larger retail environment. And what they're saying is, if you can demonstrate that you've never had a data breach, and that you have that you're not storing any sensitive authentication data, and that at least 75% of your transactions are either point-to-point encryption, again, validated point-to-point encryption in this case, or utilize EMV, which most of us should be doing by now, then you can apply to your acquirer to be considered part of the TIP program. Okay? And when you're a part of that program, what you would do is you wouldn't have to actually do a ROC annually. You would report to your acquirer that you continue to be compliant, and so you'd work with your acquirer on this. Again, PCI doesn't mandate the compliance. Your acquirer is the one you need to talk to about these questions, but they can apply with the TIP program with Visa. And if accepted, you can actually receive. So you wouldn't have to meet with somebody like me once a year and go through all of your systems. Now you still have to be PCI compliant. So keep that in mind. You can't just say, well, now I can do whatever I want to do. No, you still have to be PCI compliant. You just don't have to go through the reporting process. MasterCard has a similar program. It's called the what is it called? The Validation Exemption Program. So they added theirs a few years later, but it aligns almost exactly with the Visa's program. Obviously, if you got to do both because you're probably accepting both types of cards. And with the MasterCard Validation Exemption Program, it's notable that they did extend that down to level 4s as well. So just again, talk to your acquirer about both those programs, the TIP program with Visa and the Validation Exemption Program with MasterCard.
So do the other card brands have something similar or not, like American Express, Discover?
Yeah, just talk to your acquirer about that. Most of them will follow Visa's lead as MasterCard did. It's really going to be the acquirer anyway that's going to say, look, we're going to get you applied in these programs, and yes, let's apply that to your Amex as well.
Okay.
I'm not aware of a specific program though with Amex or Discover.
Okay, so for the smaller merchants out there, you use some terms like level 1, level 2. You use the term ROC. Can you explain what those are for our non-data security folks on the line?
Sorry about that. Yeah, so a level 1 merchant is one that does have to complete a ROC, and your acquirer will tell you what level you are. So again, that's one of the action items from this is definitely talk to your acquirer. If you're not already speaking with your acquirer regularly on matters of PCI compliance and data security, get that relationship started. But they'll tell you, hey, you're a level 1. And if they designate you level 1, then you have to complete a ROC, and that's spelled ROC, and it stands for Report on Compliance. It is a lengthy document, and the only types of people that can complete a ROC have undergone certification with PCI, and that's a QSA such as myself or an ISA. An ISA is an internal security assessor. QSA is a qualified security assessor. I don't know why I get the qualifications and someone else has to be internal, but at any rate, they then commonly would then be called an assessor, and that assessor would check each of some odd 600 different requirements and testing procedures, which can be reduced based on the use of a P2PE solution. So if you're doing a P2PE solution, you can still say, well, we're only going to look at these 33 or somewhere in that order of magnitude, about probably 50 tests. So that's a ROC. The other term you'll hear a lot is SAQ, S-A-Q, sometimes pronounced SAQ, sometimes pronounced just SAQ, which stands for Self-Assessment Questionnaire. And hopefully everyone's familiar with that because as a level, so level 1s have to do a ROC. A level 2 merchant has fewer transactions, and they would either do an SAQ or they can optionally do a ROC. And then level 4 merchants are the ones that are most common in our space. These are the individual operators, and they would generally perform a self-assessment. Again, work with your acquirer on that because they may have a special program for completing that self-assessment. Level 3 is not really relevant in our industry. Level 3 is e-commerce only, so that's why I skipped that number. But level 1s, 2s, and 4s are generally where you'll see that.
Okay, great. So we're approaching the top of the hour, so I guess I'll give you guys each maybe 30 seconds for parting comments.
I guess I've been talking, and I'll go ahead and go first. Again, just really appreciate everyone joining today. Reach out to these vendors, check out the case studies. I really appreciate all the vendors doing what they've done to not only build the solutions, to the earlier person's question about why do we not, what we do. We have the solutions now, so so go out and let's use them. Let's secure our industry. Sharon?
Thank you. I want to give a special thanks to Sam and all of his expertise in leading us through this effort. Special thank you to all of our vendors and the participation that we've had, and hope that we can encourage more people to come and share these solutions so that we can make the industry better and better.
Great.
So thank you, Linda, for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thanks to both of you. And again, the white paper will be released the end of next week, and the interviews, the playback for this, as well as the white paper will all be on your 365 portal under this particular webinar. So with that, we'll wrap it up. And thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great day.